CrossCode, a retro-inspired 2D action RPG set in the distant future, combining 16-bit SNES-style graphics, butter-smooth physics, a fast-paced combat system, engaging puzzle mechanics, and a gripping sci-fi story. According to the game's developers anyway, you know how they gotta make themselves look good. This is an indie game developed by Radical Fish Games starting all the way back in 2012, good lord, and one I didn't even know existed until fairly recently. It made its way to Indiegogo in 2015 in order to get crowdfunded, which has proven to be a hit-or-miss way to go about funding projects in the past, but thankfully this one reached its quota and even a few stretch goals. Not all of them though, including one that would have included a port to the Wii U! Damn it! 3 years later, the game got its Steam release in September of 2018 and was released on consoles in July this year as a matter of fact. Given the fact that my computer's a potato, I played this on the Switch, which is, you know, the next best thing from the Wii U, I guess, and it's the version we'll be looking at today. It's a bummer that I couldn't have been there to help fund this game, but maybe I should be more grateful than I'm just finding out about it, since this game looked promising from the single page alone. Having to wait at least 6 years to play it, my condolences to the backers, I mean, jeez. How did I find out about this game then? Well, I made a tweet saying that I would love it if someone were to make an indie game in the style of the Japan exclusive 2D Tales games. My boy Young Falcon told me to check this game out. I looked at the trailer and immediately came to the conclusion that this wasn't what I was looking for at all. However, it looked really clean all things considered, and the trailer sold me on the game. I downloaded it and gave it a shot, only finding out about this game from one person. Maybe this will be a hidden gem? If anything, it's more sweet content for the channel. After all, I want to cover indie games, but my audience cares more about RPGs. If I combine the two, everyone's a winner. I'm a freaking genius. With that, I played the game and, well, here we are. Does it deserve more attention? Would it be best to stay hidden in the shadows? Will I ever get my indie games based off the likes of Tales of Destiny Director's Cut and Rebirth? All these questions answered. Okay, most of these questions answered and more in this revolutionary review of CrossCode. Let's go back to one of those back-of-the-box statements, 16-bit SNES-style graphics. That system is one of the top dogs when it comes to classic RPGs. Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Earthbound, Tales of Fantasia, oh wait! All of these sport iconic pixel art which this game attempts to replicate, and boy oh boy it succeeds with flying colors and then some. This game is oozing with charm, and the stylized graphics are a big contributing factor to that. The detailed sprite work in combination with the vibrant, expansive color palette makes for a game that not only harkens to the looks of a SNES classic, but surpasses the system's capabilities. There are tons of visual effects, camera zooms, and a laundry list of animations for characters and enemies alike that heighten the game's technical prowess to an impressive level. That being said, the Switch version does tend to struggle a bit to keep up with it all on many occasions, par for the course when it comes to this console. While you could say that this game should have been optimized for the system more, I say that the Switch should just have more power already, but I digress. Environments are incredibly detailed and layered, which give them a lot of depth, but one problem I noticed with this is that it can be kinda hard to determine what is and isn't on the same plane as you. There's a considerable amount of platforming over the course of the game, and it got kind of frustrating when my depth perception would fail me over and over again. I'd like to think the issue isn't on my end since this has never happened with any other game, so I wish that there was some way to make the different layers a bit more distinct. Maybe making the lower and higher planes a bit dimmer or something? I don't know, anything would have been nice, but other than that, I've got no complaints about how the environments look. The way the story is presented is through dialogue boxes and character portraits, and thankfully the game has an enormous catalog of portraits per character, allowing for them to properly express how they're feeling in every given moment. And on top of every character's awesome designs, the portraits are illustrated pretty competently, so call me a fan. The game doesn't feature any voice acting, which is fine since the game's an independent title and all, and it's not like the game needs any thanks again to the wide catalog of portraits and dialogue dripping with charm. Anyway, since there's no voice work to discuss and sound design's on point as it should be, that just leaves the soundtrack. Guys, the more I listen to this thing, the more and more I love it. For one, it's pretty beefy, featuring a whopping 64 tracks, one of gaming's favorite numbers. Areas and cities are all given their own music, there are multiple battle themes, the boss battle tracks get you hyped up for a good fight, and there are even a decent amount of character themes, hell yeah! Songs are all the perfect length as well, allowing for a soundtrack that has diversity as well as memorability. I found myself humming so many of these songs the further I got into the game, especially those character themes, which are incredibly fitting for whichever character or group of characters they're meant to represent. Hell, there are even some songs that only play once, and yet I still found them incredibly memorable, with a few of them managing to be among my favorites in the game. This is how you do a good OST. I'm surprised I ended up liking it as much as I do, because admittedly, I'm not a fan of a good portion of the instrumentation. It sounds like what they used in Project Cross Zone, having incredibly artificial sounding instruments, but here it's clear that the songs were composed with this instrumentation in mind, which definitely helps. Anyway, yeah, this OST is awesome. I don't regret buying it off Bandcamp for a second. Matter of fact, the presentation as a whole is awesome. This game looks and sounds clean as hell. Putting Setting aside the performance hiccups and some depth perception flaws, there's a lot to look at and listen to with it all being pretty damn pleasant, and it feels so good to say that. That being said, these are all nice, but it's really the story and gameplay that make for an excellent RPG, let alone a good video game. So let's talk about those, starting with the former. What kind of tale do we have today? Well, like stated previously, it's a sci-fi story that has a setting similar to popular anime, resulting quality may vary. An MMO where people can enter the game through a headgear and experience a virtual simulation like nothing before. This in-game game is called CrossWorlds, and fear not, this isn't your typical we're trapped in the game and if you die in the game, you die in real life, also I have a harem for some reason type of deal. This in-game MMO is strictly the setting for CrossCode's narrative to take place in, which is cool. With that established, let's get into the story of this game. Not the game in the game, but the game outside the game. You get it. After a brief introduction with some important characters we won't be seeing until the back half of the game, we're introduced to our protagonist Leah, a girl shrouded in mystery because she has, say it with me, amnesia. Take a shot, everyone. Thankfully, the revelation as to why she has amnesia is pretty cool and interesting, but blah. Leah wakes up in a cargo ship with a couple of other people, and is told by a man named Sergey that if she hopes to regain her memory, she has to play CrossWorlds, as going through the game's areas will jog her memories, so we can assume that Leah's played the game before at some point. Seems like kind of a roundabout way to get her memory back, but there's a reason for all this, and with nowhere else to go, Leah agrees. Before arriving at the playground, which is the area in which the players in-game play the game, the cargo ship is attacked by a mysterious man who's very interested in Leah, but with the help of the crewmates, she makes it to CrossWorlds, meets a few people at the game's tutorial dungeon, and finally makes it to the real game. The story starts off with the actual plot of CrossCode playing a background role as you progress through the story of CrossWorlds, but the further you get and the more you find out about Leah, the more the story of CrossCode begins to reveal itself and the bigger picture will come into play, making for a very different yet satisfying tale that focuses itself on the characters and mystery behind Leah's identity, as well as what that revelation entails. This game's got a very unique story, if anything, both in the way it's told and the actual story it's trying to tell, so bonus points for originality. Did it work? Well, let's talk about it. Pacing in hindsight feels a bit weird. You've basically got hours and hours of nothing happening in terms of the major plot while you're messing around and hanging out with the other characters, only for it to slowly reveal itself the further you go. But honestly, it works out a lot better than you'd think. It's no secret that the characters are my favorite aspect of a story. Hell, I believe it to be the most important aspect. They're the catalysts and the ones who drive the narrative forward. You can have good characters carry a bad plot, but bad characters can drag down a good plot, you know? I say all this because even if the plot was progressing at a snail's pace for the most part, that time was used to develop the colorful cast, in turn making for a positive experience overall. Said cast is phenomenal due to the fact that they're characterized so well that they feel like real people, which I'm sure is exactly what the writers were going for given that they're people you meet online in CrossWorlds. You'll hear them talk about real world events or discuss some of their favorite aspects of the game, and it's all really interesting stuff. Not to mention there's some pretty great diversity. Most of the characters are European, with one of the main characters, Emily, being French. I honestly can't remember the last time I've experienced something like that, so I thought that was really cool. Doesn't hurt that she's a really fun, competitive character who loves to kick back with CrossWorlds when not attending to her studies. There's also my boy Toby, who's very shy but always gets passionate whenever he can talk about fun trivia in regards to different monsters and environmental details over the game. He's a really nice guy, and I always thought his trivia times were really cute. Apollo is another one of my favorites. My god, he's a riot. He would always spout out about justice, honor, and whatnot, while treating Leah as a rival since they both have the same character class. The more you see him though, he ends up being a really chill guy who has an immense love for the game and respects you a lot for being able to challenge him. He's one of my favorites, right behind that mysterious girl at the beginning I can't really talk about, and of course the main character, Leah. They did a really great job with her, especially considering the fact that she doesn't talk. This isn't in the same vein as your typical silent protagonist like Link or Ludger where they had to hide their voice, which, you know, should be a given since there's no voice acting, but it's actually explained in-game as a rare glitch that can happen with player avatars, making them unable to speak. Gotta love how they use the story setting to its fullest, with this being an excellent example. Leah has to resort to a very small vocabulary that slowly grows over the course of the game, while remaining incredibly limiting the whole way through. Regardless, due in combination to the wide array of sprite animations and character portraits, you always know how Leah feels and what she's trying to convey without the need for words, and that's incredibly impressive. It's masterful writing for sure, and I applaud them for making such a developed character this way. Combined with the game's villains who all really ended up surprising me, GG to this game's characters. Going back to the plot itself, when it did finally come to the foreground, contextualizing all the foreshadowing and whatnot, I was surprised by it as well. What the central conflict ends up being is really creative and again takes full advantage of the MMO setting. I don't want to spend any time discussing it in detail though, because a big part of the experience is the whole mystery behind Leah and how that connects with said central conflict, so just take my word for it. It's really freaking good and really freaking cool. That being said, there's one glaring issue with it, which is also my biggest problem with the story as a whole, and that's the fact that, well, it's kinda incomplete. So there ends up being a good ending and a bad ending, with the bad ending being triggered by failing to do a specific side quest. Easy thing to activate, you get the true good ending, bada bing bada boom. However, you're sent to this sort of purgatory area with an arrow pointing to a post-game episode, only it's not done yet and will be available through paid DLC. Alright, listen. I get it. This is a game that's been years in the making by a small team, and the fact that we got something like this at all is pretty damn cool. It's understandable that they'd save something like this for an extra fee at a later date, but the thing is, there are loose ends with the game's story that directly lead into this. The game's all like, what happens next? Oh, you gotta wait for it to be done, and then you gotta pay for it, and that's so lame. We'd all complain about something like this from a AAA release, so I gotta call it out here. And the worst part is that on my end anyway, it's gonna take even longer to come out because the Switch version is already missing some features the PC release has due to a difference in hardware requiring longer development time. I'm conflicted, dude. I wish the story was properly wrapped up in the first place, with the extra post-game content being just that. Extra. But I also want to be more lenient because the level of quality the writing has shown, as well as how much time and care was put into it all using the game setting to its fullest, was astounding. The game is a clear labor of love through and through, and because of that, I think I'm inclined to give it a pass on this. I think it's clear enough that this wasn't a result of laziness, but rather putting so much effort in the main campaign that they were hella eager to get that out and save the post-game for later in order to potentially flesh it out even further. That's what I like to believe anyway, so that's what I'm going with. There's no way the writing was this solid only for them to at the last second be all like, they'll pay for the end, let's make them wait and finish this later. Besides, it's not like this left too sour a taste in my mouth. The game does have an ending, all things considered, and a fairly satisfying one at that. Could have been a bit more satisfying, sure, but you know what? That's okay. Especially considering, again, the amount of love put into the entirety of the main campaign is something else. Putting all the before stated praise aside, there's a lot of smaller details that make me all giddy. The world building in CrossWorlds only increases the quality of writing in CrossCode because this MMO features a living, breathing world full of different races, politics, and customs to get involved in. Not to mention that the story of CrossWorlds is essentially learning the lore of the game, adding a lot of unnecessary detail that just made me smile like crazy. They didn't need to do this, but they did, and that's awesome. My favorite detail though was all the other players you'll run across as you play, whether they're chilling in a group or flying solo in the overworld. That was amazing. This story is amazing, only heightened by the MMO setting in conjunction with the creative liberties taken through the plot and characters. Unfortunately, the story wasn't that long, taking me around 40 hours to complete doing nearly every side quest in the game, but I was enjoying myself the whole way through so much that I wanted more. I needed more, and the fact that more was teased wouldn't have frustrated me nearly as much if what we were given from the start wasn't this good, you know? The story of CrossWorlds and CrossCode work hand in hand, and that, if anything, is really damn cool. You know what? I'm pleasantly surprised so far. The presentation's solid, the story's dope. This is turning out to be a pretty good time. But there's one thing we haven't talked about yet, and that is the gameplay. The make it or break it factor, personally speaking, as that's what I believe to be the most important element to a game by a mile. Does CrossCode deliver? Only one way to find out. For this review, I'm gonna actually save the battle system for last just to mix things up a bit. Gotta keep you regulars on your toes, you know? How does the game play outside of monster hunting? Pretty damn well. Towns are all the perfect size, having enough substance along with distinction to make each one memorable and fun to traverse through. There are tons of people to talk to, and with the game having a bunch of other players, like I brought up already, it truly feels as if you're experiencing an MMO, and that's dope as hell. The overworld is also a blast to traverse through. There's a lot of layering and platforming, meaning tons of alternate paths, optional areas, and multiple ways to reach your destination. You can definitely just blaze through them as the way you're supposed to go is clear, but there are dozens of branching paths whispering at you to just check it out for a second, only for 30 minutes to pass by. Not to mention you got plenty of water. What the? Water's evil in this game? Alright, I take back everything I said. This game sucks. Every area has this sort of complexity while also providing unique gimmicks and layouts. So much of my playtime was discovering new areas that I may or may not have to visit later, and I never once found it monotonous. Before I can get to that point, you know where you have to go, so just go there and continue the story. Not to mention you'll have dozens of side quests that'll keep things entertaining anyway. Oh man, dude, the side quests were fire. There were so many of them, and while a handful consisted of you collecting or killing X amount of Y, so many more of them had you doing a variety of different things like minigames, challenge runs, optional dungeons, and bosses. There's a lot of game to discover that's completely up to you to figure out. I ended up doing nearly all of them this first playthrough and had a blast the whole way through. I highly recommend doing the same because these are great and will just make you fall in love with the game that much more. Finally, we have the dungeons. Holy crap, these are incredible. I see these described as 2D Zelda taken to the extreme, and while I don't have enough experience experience with that franchise to back that up, I can say that if Zelda consists of dungeons half as good as the ones here, then it's no wonder that's one of Nintendo's big boys. These all have their own themes, gimmicks, and boatloads of puzzles to solve, putting your brainpower to the test outside of combat. They're long, challenging, and expertly designed, but I do want to put a heavy emphasis on the challenge factor because these dungeons get hard. Really hard. Insert innuendo here. When I was tweeting about how I was going to start playing this game, one reply in particular stood out to me, and that was how the person in question really enjoyed the game, but had to stop because the puzzles got too much for them. And you know what? I can easily see why. Because not only are they real brain teasers, but also require ample reaction time and mastery of your character's movement. Thankfully, the game's introduced options to alleviate the issue in the form of sliders that modify timing for puzzles, and even help make enemies less aggressive and powerful if you're having trouble with combat. The game makes it clear from the start that challenge was intended both in terms of the dungeon design and combat, but I'm glad that they want to make their product as accessible as possible with these options. All that being said, I decided to not use the sliders for anything, making it so that I could have the most authentic experience, for lack of a better term. And I've gotta say, these puzzles were awesome to sit down and figure out. Every time I take a deep breath, do my best to figure it out, and when I would, oh baby, I'd feel like a freaking genius. Very satisfying to get through each and every one, and none of them dragged on for too long. Seriously, it doesn't hurt that the game's controls are silky smooth. Leah controls like a dream, being very responsive and incredibly versatile, having tons of options available for you to use both in and out of combat. Our final topic for today. Can we talk for a second? Just you and me, alright? At the beginning of the year, I reviewed a little game known as Star Ocean First Departure R, and if you haven't watched the review, you should. If you did, you know very well that I absolutely did not enjoy my time with it. It was quite a shock too, because it had honestly been a while since I played a game that disappointed me to that level. Watching a lot of reviews and post-commentary content on YouTube, I tend to only pick up what a good amount of people recommend, but for Star Ocean, I decided to take a leap of faith for the sake of YouTube content and a potential new RPG series to cover on the channel. But man, that game burned me, and I've been making an effort to only stick with what trusted sources say are a really good investment. But once again, after a single recommendation, I decided to give it a shot, and while I was excited, I couldn't help but be worried about the combat. Will this be yet another system that looks way more fun than it actually is? Or will this not only be a good combat system, but the shining aspect of the whole package? Well, after actually finishing the game, I'm so pleased to say that the latter question can be answered with a wholehearted yes! You enter battles right on the overworld. You have a fast melee attack and a gun you can rapid fire or wait for a few seconds to fire charge shots. You can guard, use items to buff your stats or heal yourself, and dodge up to 3 times in a row to mitigate spamming. Very small toolkit at the start, but there's plenty of depth regardless. Charge shots can be bounced off walls, encouraging trick shots and using your surroundings to snipe your opponent's weak spots. You can also dash cancel, consisting of you dashing at the tail end of your combo to make it so that you don't have any cooldown between combos and are able to continuously lay the smackdown. Not to mention you can team up and form parties with other characters, allowing for teamwork and proper distribution of aggro. On top of this, all enemies have different movements and openings to attack, making for a lot of pattern recognition and those 2 words I love to hear, skill mastery. And before your limited selection is able to grow stale, even if it, never really does, you're given even more to work with in the form of different tiered special attacks and elements which add a ton to your moveset in the form of new attacks, elemental advantages, and even more special attacks. All these newer options you're given are a direct result of the game's skill system, which is represented by the circuit grid with every element getting their own segment and different skill trees to boot. There are many branches that offer a variety of playstyles, allowing for plenty of customization and even replay value as you can go through 2 different campaigns giving Leah an entirely new moveset. Pretty cool stuff, and it offers a form of growth outside of level ups, which is appreciated. In fact, level ups honestly take a bit of a back seat, not just to the skills that offer more stat boosts, but equipment as well. It's to the point where the game will calculate the combined level of your different equipment and emphasize how that's what you want to keep up with over the course of the game, meaning that grinding is kept at a minimum. I never felt a need to grind over the course of the game, which may be due in part to me completing the side quests as I went along, but also because I made sure to keep my equipment up to snuff. The game gives you plenty of options to come out on top of challenging battles, and that, my friends, is a formula for success. Regardless of all the numbers and stats flying around, due to this being a real-time action RPG, your skill trumps all else. You've got to learn how these enemies work and when it's best to attack, and thanks to the multitude of checkpoints and infinite lives, you're given ample opportunity to learn what works and what doesn't. Battles with normal enemies land that perfect middle ground between requiring some form of thinking, but not too much to the point where you're not allowed to turn your brain off even a little. And boss battles, oh boy, these kicked so much ass. Lots of unique patterns and attacks to figure out, all having multiple means of defeating them, which the game will highlight and encourage through the genius design of having other players players discuss their experiences with the battles. You'll even have a handful of PvP battles against Apollo, and since he's the same character class as you, he shows off a wide variety of different routes you can take on your skill circuit branches, making for a genius showcase of tools at your own disposal. You've got a lot to work with, but you're not overpowered. Enemies can bite back equally as hard, but they're never cheap. When you figure them out, you've got them down. These enemies right here gave me a really hard time when I first ran into them, but eventually I got their pattern down, and when the game starts throwing a bunch of them at me, I say bring it the hell on. The game makes you feel so damn good for getting its number, and the whole way through I was smiling and smiling and smiling. Add in a satisfying chaining system that increases drop rates by fighting multiple enemies back to back, which gave me heavy Gunvolt vibes looking back on it. Playing the game feels invigorating. Regardless of how much you do it, battling never grew stale. Talk about taking advantage of all your introduced mechanics, man. This game's awesome in just about every way. The closer I got to the end, the sadder I became because I just wanted more. I've still got a lot to do in terms of side content, and even though I'm a little bummed I have to wait for the extra post-game content, hell yeah, dude, I've got extra post-game content coming at some point. My last review was Xenoblade Chronicles, a game I adore and was so satisfying to experience all over again. And you know what? I had similar vibes when playing this game, and that's not a compliment to be taken lightly. That game's in my top 5 of all time, and while I do feel like this could be me partially caught up in the hype, after critically looking at the game, damn. Just damn. Play CrossCode. That's the verdict. Just play CrossCode. This review may have come off as overwhelmingly positive, but that's not to say that this game is flawless. Not at all. I did bring up some issues that, despite the justification, still bother me to some extent, as well as the other little things I noticed. I just wanted it to be clear that the things this game does right overshadow those lower quality aspects enough that I don't feel inclined to bring them up. It's ironic that I took a risk in playing this game without knowing too much about it, because the game itself takes many risks in how it's structured and what it sets out to accomplish. I mean, can you think of many other RPGs that have this much faith in their characters? So much faith that they literally make the plot move at a snail's pace for about half the runtime and make it work? Persona kinda reaches that point, but the amount of time spent away from the story isn't nearly to the extent as this. And my god, that's yet another one of my favorite games that this title reminds me of. I understand that it can get a little cringy and easy to roll your eyes at people who laud every new thing they experience as one of their new favorites of all time or whatever. It comes off as hyperbolic and somewhat unprofessional. I mean, I'm no IGN or completionist, but I at least like to look as if I know what I'm doing and feel as if I've got a good idea of what it's like to be a good reviewer. I don't get impressed by just anything. However, I try to find the positives in even the worst packages. The good that could have come out of the bad, the light in the dark. I must be the light when you're in the dark. As I played this game though, CrossCode just kept on delivering, kept outdoing itself, kept providing new ways to keep me engaged on top of genius design choices. It's unique, it's ambitious, it's excellent. At the end of my Xenoblade Chronicles review, I said we needed more games like it. Titles that are polished and packed to the brim. How funny is it that this is the game I'm covering immediately after, and it ended up being just that? I never would have seen it coming. But CrossCode, without a doubt, is a masterpiece.